Welcome, dear viewer. I hope you are having a wonderful night. Tonight, I'll be telling some terrifyingly scary stories. I hope you are warm and ready. Let's begin. I didn't tell Dr. Sutherland about the lady with bleeding eyeballs, about how she'd been lingering in the stairwell whenever I got up to pee at night. And really, can you blame me? There was no way to broach the subject without confirming his worst suspicions. Oh, it's rough, Doc. I've got a catalog of symptoms longer than your grocery list. Memory loss, dry mouth, mood swings, and there was one more thing. What was it again? Oh yeah, sometimes I see the outline of a figure creeping around the upstairs landing. So rather than relieve my bladder, I barricade the bedroom door with a dresser. Crazy, huh? If I'd said that, his fancy fountain pen would have no doubt gone whizzing across the little notepad. Or maybe he'd have saved himself the trouble by busting out the big rubber stamp labeled deranged. From the dark circles under my eyes, he could no doubt tell things weren't stellar back home. Still, I forced myself to smile while I fielded a series of loaded questions about my fragile mental condition. At the end of our session, the doctor leaned forward in his armchair, close enough that I could count the bristly nose hairs, and said, "We all just want what's best for everyone, Robin." "Of course," I replied, my fingers sinking into the padded armrests. I picked Kyle up from school. Back home, Molly was scrolling through her phone. After 30 minutes of gentle coercion, they both tackled their homework while I whipped together a beef stew. We ate together in silence. Afterwards, Molly went out with some friends I'd never met before. I told her to get back by 11, but it's 16 who listens to their mother. Kyle changed into his pajamas, and then we read the latest Dogman book in his room. I cherished moments like those. In 3 short years, puberty would rear its ugly head, and then lying next to his mommy would only embarrass him. To cap the night off, I tortured myself by flicking through some old photo albums. The wind howled around the roof, startling me awake. At the end of the hall, bony fingers scraped roughly across bookcases and over floorboards. I folded a pillow over my skull to drown out these sounds, but horrible images of twisted metal and blood-splattered glass kept me up until dawn. Still groggy, I shuffled into the lounge. A single Nerf bullet lay on the windowsill. Those stupid darts kept appearing even though I'd confiscated Kyle's blaster weeks earlier. I crossed the room and pulled the curtain back. Down below, past the ivy wall, Mr. Rutherford trimmed the chest-high hedge separating our gardens. The elderly man glanced up and gave a friendly salute. He got a half-hearted wave in response. For both Mr. Rutherford and his wife, retirement had really meant ample opportunities to stick their noses in other people's businesses. I flirted with asking whether they'd spotted a figure stalking around my house last night. At our next appointment, Dr. Sutherland asked about Chloe. 10 minutes and an entire box of Kleenex later, I eased into a story about my 9th birthday when this freckly kid at the play park demanded a kiss. I said no, because his breath reeked worse than raw sewage. So he snatched the Tamagotchi clipped onto my belt and smashed it with a rock. I ran home crying to tell Chloe, who marched me back there and pinned the bully kid down beside the swing set. Since the little shit refused to apologize, she wrestled the light-up trainers off his feet, laced them together, and tossed them up around a lamppost. "She sounds like a wonderful sister," the doctor said, offering me a fresh box of tissues. In the kitchen, the sight of a recycling bin stuffed with wine bottles almost triggered a panic attack. They didn't vanish with a rub of my eyes, so I searched the entire house and discovered a pill packet beneath the clock on the bookshelf. Did I black out again? If the neighbors caught me half-cut, that information might have reached the good doctor. Or worse, my beloved husband. The bottles got dumped at the recycling center on our way to collect Kyle. Over breakfast, Molly announced her plans to see Wolf Alice play in London. "I'll be back Sunday," she said, like this was no big deal. Molly, like her dear aunt, had straight blonde hair and green eyes. Kyle and I were all curly brown locks and full cheeks. I sighed. "Who are you going with? Where are you staying? And when did you plan on telling me?" "James and Emma James's brother's flat." And, rubbing both temples to suppress a thumper of a headache, I took a deep breath, held it, and tried expelling all that toxic air. Cue an argument so well played out, you'd think we read it from a script. Her, "You're the worst, with all these dumb rules." Me, "I don't know these people. It's too dangerous." In my mind, I heard my mother's voice, loud and angry. Next time, Dr. Sutherland asked about Chloe. I fought back the emotion long enough to get out a story about the two of us learning the dance routine for Wannabe by the Spice Girls in our parents' living room. When that second chorus hits, you lean your top half forward and kick your left leg back. And I did this so hard and so fast I accidentally punted Mom's porcelain cat, the one forever batting an invisible string out of the air. Chloe picked it up, revealing the face had cracked right along the middle. My blood pressure shot into the stratosphere and refused to climb back down until Baby Spice, Kaka Chloe, hugged me into her chest and ran her fingers through my hair. That simple gesture always calmed my nerves. Once I stopped sobbing, she promised she'd tell her parents it was her fault, not mine. When Dad's Ford pulled into the driveway, I hid in the bedroom with a pillow folded over my skull so I couldn't hear the raised voices. My sister's bravery earned her a collection of ugly purple bruises. Part of me wanted to tell Dr. Sutherland about the foam darts, although he'd clearly labeled me a basket case the instant my file landed on his desk. No sense handing him the smoking gun, right? With all the grace of a constipated hippo, he steered the conversation toward my husband. I explained how my marriage felt like the eggshell walking Olympics. Early in our relationship, I once casually mentioned I didn't much like driving. And by the time Kyle was potty trained, if I so much as said I needed to nip to the store, Brian snapped back with, "No, you hate driving. I'll take you." Of course, Dr. Sutherland believed my ex to be a real stand-up guy. A proper bloke's bloke who loved a good laugh. Know what I mean? Hell of a golfer too. The pair frequently bumped into each other at the driving range. Funny, that. I leaned forward in the armchair, made my voice all serious, and said, "The day Brian and I split up, I barricaded myself in the bathroom because I couldn't take any more screaming. And do you know what that bastard did? He used a credit card to undo the lock and yell in my face some more. Mom, and are you still drinking?" Deflated, I shrunk back into my chair. No. Every other weekend, Brian whisked the kids away for some quality time. Our divorce had become a real shit show. He demanded full custody due to my alarming behavior, but the judge dismissed this request because he had a nasty habit of pummeling drivers who sniped his parking spot or cut him off at an intersection. If you talked with our friends and family, they all had some notion about his temper, although they mostly waved these outbursts aside with statements such as, "Have you seen the way people drive in this town?" With the kids gone, I turned every room upside down, searching for more medicine. Weeks earlier, during a mandatory inspection, a social worker almost found enough Cipralex to dope an elephant beneath my mattress. By pure chance, my eye happened to cross the foil wrapper at the very last second, and I quickly stuffed it up my sleeve, narrowly avoiding getting sectioned on the spot. Alone in the empty house, the grief came in waves. My mind cycled through hideous images of a cracked windshield and flashing ambulance lights reflected in the spider web of glass. At midnight, feeling brave enough to use the bathroom, I climbed out of bed and stepped into the hall. Up ahead, the lounge door creaked open. I hesitated. The cold, stale air of the house plummeted 10 degrees as that door eased inward, revealing a thick darkness. From inside the room, a pair of bulging eyes regarded me. wet and shiny with blood. I bolted back into my room, pushed a dresser against the door, and climbed beneath the sheets like a petrified child. Already on the verge of losing my sanity, I used a pillow to drown out the sound of uneasy steps staggering around the house. Now and again, the figure's presence radiated through the door, which almost seemed worse than actually seeing it. 6 sleepless hours later, I ventured into the lounge. Crimson pools of blood covered the lounge floorboards like little ink blots, surrounding a single Nerf dart. I scrubbed the floor with scalding water until my fingers turned raw. The dart, like all the others, got tossed in the bin. Not that this ever did any good. More would appear, and I knew why. It was a punishment, a way of reminding me that the accident was all my fault. I told Dr. Sutherland Chloe was your Hall of Fame coolant, and how that coolness rubbed off on me by symbiosis. Take our Nerf war, for instance. It started when I returned home to an empty house one evening. Chloe, the babysitter, wasn't answering her phone, and after several minutes of screeching the kids' names, I heard whispers from the bathroom. Already on hold with the police, I raced toward the shower and ripped the curtain aside. As a hail of Nerf bullets pelted me in the face, I screamed so loudly that those old fogies next door complained their ears didn't stop ringing for an entire week. Before me, on either side of Chloe, the kids doubled over with laughter, proud of their little prank. And 4 days later, after I finally stopped shaking, I had to admit they got me pretty good. The ensuing conflict became known as the Nerf War. My sister and I surprised each other at home, the shops, and pilates. Anywhere besides work, Molly and Kyle helped set up sting operations, switched allegiances, and even acted as human shields on multiple occasions. My absolute masterstroke came when Chloe took Kyle to the playground one afternoon. After jumping off the climbing frame, he told his aunt that a little girl had broken her arm inside the tube tunnel and needed help. Concerned, she flew up the steps, crawled through the pipe on her elbows and knees, and found herself face to face with, "You sneaky bitch," she laughed, as a Nerf bullet struck her right between the eyes. A tiny portion of that pent-up anxiety seeped out of me when I told the story. Brian dropped the kids off on Sunday night. "How'd you get on?" I asked Molly as she marched into the kitchen. "Fine," she mumbled, making a cup of tea only for herself, not me. Before the accident, we'd taken turns and drunk them together while watching Love Island or Bake Off. My blackouts ended that little ritual. After Kyle showered and changed into his pajamas, we read an old edition of Captain Underpants, and then I went and rapped Molly's door. From the edge of her bed, I told her I didn't like how far apart we'd grown. "Whose fault is that?" she snapped, rolling away from me. "I know what I put you through wasn't fair, but I'm much better now," I said, my voice breaking apart. "Dad thinks you're drinking again. Says the neighbors do too." What could I have said? "Oh, your father is not the superhero you think he is. Throughout our relationship, if the master manipulator was happy, he allowed me to be happy. But the second he stopped being happy, unfortunately, telling my daughter this meant also convincing her she had a sociopath for a father. There was no level that man wouldn't stoop to if it painted me in a bad light. I wallowed in bed, never dozing off for more than 20 minutes. Those bottles and pills weren't mine, I think. It's difficult to tell whenever one day blurs into the next. Plus, if I'd taken them, it might have caused another blackout. Maybe my doped-up self tiptoed around the house, strategically placing bullets as a form of self-torture. Perhaps the doctor was right. Perhaps I had come untethered again. At our next session, Dr. Sutherland finally asked about the accident. I swallowed a lump and told him Chloe came over beforehand and that she wanted a girls' night out. But the mere suggestion made my stomach queasy. "I thought getting divorced meant you didn't have to worry about what that bastard thinks," she said. "We're not divorced. We're separated." Same thing. Besides, isn't he in Portugal golfing with his buddies? He'd find out, I answered grimly. I'll bump into somebody who knows us. So glad that the pricks are gone, she muttered. Don't even say it. On the sofa, we talked our way around my current predicament. She caught me up on her new job, the Vegas trip with her pals, and a bunch of other wonderful life events I'd missed out on because Brian had isolated me from friends and family. Chloe, bless her heat, gave hoisting me out of that funk her best effort, but a permanent storm cloud had hung over me since the breakup. We hugged goodbye at the door. Then, 5 minutes later, while I gathered our empty plates and cheese board in the upstairs lounge, my eye came across a misshapen lump behind the curtain. Before I could react, Chloe sprung from her hiding spot beside the window and launched a dart straight at my forehead. Gotcha! For the first time in weeks, I actually found myself laughing, and I knew right then I'd get through the separation, divorce, or whatever lay in store. All I needed was a little support from my big sister. It took a profound effort to tell Dr. Sutherland how, later that night, 2 police officers knocked on the door and revealed there'd been an accident. There was more blood in the pictures of the wreck than I thought a human body could possibly hold. At the hospital, Chloe lay motionless in bed, her face encased with bandages stained red around the eyes. After 20 minutes of me picking glass shards from her blood-clotted hair and whispering how she had to hold on because her little sister needed her, a doctor stepped into the room, said we needed to have a very difficult conversation, and explained Chloe had less brain activity than a tin of soup. Keeping her hooked up to a respirator only prolonged the inevitable. Through tears, I insisted he not pull the plug. Chloe was a warrior. The strongest person I ever knew if it had been anyone else inside that cage of twisted metal. They would have died instantly, but not her. She'd held on for me. She was my protector. And I knew she'd always be there during the good times and the bad. Until, suddenly, she wasn't. I never looked at the body. That let my imagination run wild, plugging the gaps. Images of a figure flayed in skin with glass shards jutting from a broken neck haunted my waking thoughts. And those eyes, those hideous, bleeding eyes. Dr. Sutherland's pen scribbled away furiously. The sound whipped me back to the present, and I stopped myself from telling him how. In the weeks that followed Chloe's death, life became a series of backouts intermixed with pills and alcohol. I couldn't live with the guilt. If I hadn't called her that night begging for a shoulder to cry on, she never would have been driving along that exact stretch of motorway whenever the damn 18-wheeler pulled out. The weeks passed in a whirlwind of missed school runs and forgotten lunches. Normally, my big sister came to the rescue during times like those. What was I meant to do now that she was gone? One night, after I'd sobered up, Molly started World War by sneaking out late. Immediately, 2 police officers turned up in response to a domestic disturbance and declared me in a compromised condition. Then came the investigations and mandatory wellness checks. The court mandated therapy. Brian worked overtime, painting me as the worst mother on the planet. A carefully placed comment to a teacher here, a chance meeting with Dr. Sutherland there. Ensuring all this remained hidden became a full-time job. I couldn't let anybody discover Chloe punished me by creeping around and dropping Nerf bullets. Otherwise, they'd call it a coping mechanism or an avoidance technique. Or a hysterical mother who couldn't face reality. As I told Dr. Sutherland the day Chloe died, all joy seeped out of the world, and I couldn't help but wonder whether the kid staying with me wasn't best for everyone. Could I really do this without my big sister looking out for me? That sense of despair lingered for the rest of the day. I sleepwalked through dinner, tucking Kyle in. Images of the wreck haunted me as I lay motionless in bed. They brought along the sense of being untethered. I couldn't block them out. I physically needed, my big sister. What I wouldn't have given was to have her fingers run through my hair one last time. Just then, out in the hall, floorboards creaked. Be careful what you wish for. I slipped beneath the blanket, squeezed my eyes shut, and told myself those sounds were imaginary. Out of nowhere, I couldn't breathe. The bedroom door creaked open while I lay paralyzed. The figure crawled across the floor and up onto my bed, mattress springs groaning as the covers got pulled tight. Through the protective barrier, a forehead was pressed against mine. Before the accident, this was the part where I called Chloe. What did I do now that she'd returned from the dead to haunt me? Suddenly, the sheet was ripped away. I sat bolt upright, alone in the empty room. By the door, there was a single Nerf bullet. Not again. This couldn't carry on. Chloe died, and she wasn't coming back, no matter how many bullets I stashed around the house. I pulled on a gown and scooped up the dart. 6 more lay spread across the landing, a little trail. Clearly, I'd taken more pills and punished myself by laying out a scavenger hunt. Furious at myself, I crossed the hallway, gathering them as I went. From beyond the door into the lounge, there were more scrapes. Bumps, bangs, but I couldn't hide forever. My kids needed me, which meant I needed to face my problems, even if that meant facing them alone. The door to the lounge opened with a push, and on the far side of the room, my eye came across a familiar face reflected in the glass. It was Chloe, except she looked unhurt, the way I wish I could remember her. A warm glow spread throughout my body. It was her. It was really, really her. The one who made the sadness melt away with a joke or well-timed hug she'd come back. I raced across the room, shouted her name, and told her just how much I missed her. As I pushed open the window, it collided with a solid object, and then a loud snap rang up from below. I leaned outside. Under me, a shadowy figure lay sprawled across the rose bushes, quietly groaning. I thought a burglar had been breaking in until I heard the intruder curse. I rushed downstairs, ordering the kids back to bed as they leaned out of their rooms, dashed around the side of the house, flicked the landing light on, and crossed the yard. Kitted out all in black, my husband rolled around, his left shoulder misplaced from its socket. "What the fuck do you think you're doing here?" I shouted. "You stupid bitch," he hissed through clenched teeth. "Why are you opening a window in the middle of the fucking night?" A discarded backpack lay nearby. Brian moved to swat my arm aside, but instead clutched his shoulder and grimaced. Inside the pack were pills, empty wine bottles, and a bent out of shape coat hanger. The bastard had been breaking in to frame me. The layout of the house meant a fit enough person could climb the ivy fence. Clearly, Brian had been using a hanger to unhook the window latch and force his way inside. "You son of a bitch," I screamed, spittle flying from my lips. "You've been making it look like I'm drinking again." He sprung up and threw himself at my chest, hard. We both landed in the wet dirt with him on top. A gloved hand closed tight around my windpipe. My window of vision died away while Brian screamed what a terrible mother I was, and said he wished he'd killed me, that he was going to kill me. The garden and everything in it faded to black. Next thing I knew, I was staring up at Mr. Rutherford, who was trying to wrestle Brian into a headlock. The world slowly slid into view. On the far side of the hedge, a teary Mrs. Rutherford screamed into her phone, begging the police to hurry. For once, I found myself grateful that we had the nosiest neighbors on this side of the Channel Islands. If not for them, I never would have woken up. Attracted by the commotion, other residents emerged from their homes while, above us, Molly and Kyle leaned out of the lounge, their eyes wide with shock. My husband shook Mr. Rutherford off and turned on that signature charm. He only rushed over because I drunk. Dialed him, you see. Over the phone, I'd announced my plans to kill the kids and then myself. He simply rushed over to protect his family. From the look on Molly's face, I could tell she hadn't bought this little sob story. Several neighbors chased the bastard into his car, and then he almost mowed down the gathering crowd, speeding away. No doubt he'd later challenge my version of events, but the kids saw what happened. That was enough. After 2 officers took a report from both me and the Rutherfords, I put an upset Kyle to bed before turning in myself, my neck all tender and raw. A few minutes later, Molly stepped through the door, carrying 2 cups of tea. "I thought this might help your throat," she said, holding up my favorite Spice Girls mug. "There's honey in it." She stood there, her lower lip wobbling, until I swung the sheet aside and gestured for her to hop in. For a while, we lay together in silence, her head against my chest, my fingers running through her golden hair. Then she looked up at me and said, "I'm sorry about those things I said before." I told her none of that mattered now. I wouldn't have believed me either. Soon Kyle knocked on the door and asked to come in, and then the 3 of us lay there all toasty and snug. And for the first time since the accident, it felt like things might turn out all right. My family would survive this awful mess, and nothing could ever tear us apart. After all, we had my big sister looking out for us.